Sophia adjusted her navy blue scarf, the final touch to her crisp flight attendant uniform. Her morning had been uneventful, a blur of checking schedules, running pre-flight checks, and exchanging polite banter with her crewmates. This flight from New York to Los Angeles was a routine one. She'd done it dozens of times before. Yet, as the passengers began boarding, a strange unease settled over her. She shook it off, attributing it to a sleepless night. The first-class cabin filled quickly with its usual mix of business executives, wealthy travelers, and the occasional celebrity. Sophia moved gracefully through the aisles, greeting passengers and ensuring they were comfortable. When the last passenger arrived, a man and a strikingly elegant woman, she stepped forward with a warm smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome aboard," she said, her voice as smooth as ever. The man glanced at her briefly, nodding in acknowledgement before settling into his seat. For a moment, Sophia froze, the tray of champagne flutes trembling in her hand. It wasn't his tailored suit or the air of confidence he carried that caught her off guard. It was his face. Her breath hitched as she stared at him, disbelief crashing over her like a tidal wave. The man looked exactly like Matthew, her husband, who had been declared dead 5 years ago. The same strong jawline, the same piercing blue eyes that had once looked at her with so much love. Even his hair, slightly tousled, was as she remembered it. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. It couldn't be him. Matthew had died in a boating accident. She had mourned him, wept for him, and spent years piecing her life back together for the sake of their son, Lucas. Yet here he was, or someone who looked eerily like him, sitting just a few feet away, engrossed in conversation with the woman beside him. She forced herself to move, placing the tray of drinks on the nearest counter before retreating to the galley. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter as she tried to steady her breathing. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself. "It's not him. It's just someone who looks like him." But doubt gnawed at her. His voice, she had heard it clearly when he spoke to the woman. It was identical to Matthew's. And the way he smiled at something the woman said, it was so achingly familiar it made her chest tighten. Sophia peeked out from the galley, watching him. He was laughing now, his gestures animated as he spoke. The woman beside him, draped in designer clothing, leaned in close, her hand brushing his arm. Sophia's stomach twisted, a mix of jealousy and confusion. "Are you okay?" A voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see Maria, a fellow flight attendant, looking at her with concern. Sophia quickly composed herself. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Just a bit of turbulence earlier. I'll be okay." Maria nodded, though her eyes lingered on Sophia for a moment longer before returning to the cabin. Sophia knew she couldn't let this consume her. She had a job to do, and losing her composure in front of the passengers wasn't an option. But as the plane took off and the flight progressed, she couldn't stop stealing glances at the man. Every detail about him was a painful reminder of the life she had lost. Yet, he seemed utterly unaware of her, as if she were just another flight attendant. Was it truly him, or was she letting her grief and imagination play tricks on her? By the time the cabin lights dimmed for the evening, Sophia felt like she was unraveling. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. If it was Matthew, why was he here? Why had he let her believe he was dead? And who was the woman at his side? As she prepared for landing, Sophia made a decision. She would watch him as he left the plane, see if he did anything that confirmed or disproved her suspicions. She needed to know, even if it meant confronting a truth she wasn't ready to face. When the plane finally touched down and the passengers began disembarking, Sophia positioned herself near the exit, her heart pounding as she waited for him. The man walked past her, his arm casually draped around the woman's waist. Their eyes met for the briefest of moments, and Sophia swore there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze. But just as quickly, it was gone. As the couple disappeared into the crowd, Sophia stood frozen, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to call out to him, to demand answers, but fear and uncertainty held her back. It wasn't until she was alone in the terminal, her shift over, that her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, frowning at the unknown number on the screen. "I saw you looking at me on the plane." The message sent a shiver down her spine. Sophia's hands trembled as she stared at the words. Was it him? And if so, why hadn't he spoken to her? Questions swirled in her mind as she realized one thing. Whoever this man was, her life was about to change forever. The message on Sophia's phone glared back at her, each word tightening the knot in her chest. I saw you looking at me on the plane. Her fingers hovered over the screen, torn between replying and deleting it. She stared at the number, unfamiliar, untraceable. Could it really be him? Or was this some kind of twisted prank? The drive home was a blur. She kept replaying the flight in her mind, searching for any clue that might explain the surreal encounter. Every gesture, every word the man had spoken resurfaced, each detail amplifying her unease. The resemblance was too perfect to dismiss. Yet, the message unsettled her more than anything. If it was Matthew, why hadn't he approached her? By the time she arrived home, Lucas was already asleep, his small body curled under a blue blanket adorned with cartoon rockets. The sight of him brought a pang of guilt. She had spent years trying to create a stable, loving environment for her son after Matthew's death. They had both endured so much. If Matthew was alive, what would this revelation do to Lucas? Sophia stood by the window, the city lights casting faint reflections on the glass. Her phone rested in her hand, the message still unanswered. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind. What if she was wrong? What if she was right? And if it was Matthew? Where had he been all these years? Unable to sleep, Sophia found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. There he was, Matthew, smiling brightly on their wedding day. Him holding Lucas for the first time, his face a mixture of awe and exhaustion. The memories brought tears to her eyes, but they also fueled her determination. She had to know the truth. The next morning, Sophia arrived at the airport for her shift, her nerves still frayed from the previous night. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos. Suitcases rolling, announcements blaring, and passengers rushing to catch their flights. Yet, her thoughts were consumed by one thing. The man who looked like Matthew. Rough night? Maria's voice pulled her back to the present. Her colleague handed her a coffee, her brow furrowed with concern. Sophia forced a smile. Something like that. Thanks for this. Maria leaned closer, lowering her voice. You've been distracted since yesterday. Did something happen? Sophia hesitated. Maria was one of her closest friends, but how could she explain something so unbelievable? Just, someone on the flight reminded me of someone I used to know, she said finally. Maria nodded, sensing the weight behind Sophia's words, but choosing not to press further. Well, if you need to talk, I'm here. As the day progressed, Sophia's focus wavered. She found herself scanning every face in the terminal, half expecting to see the man again. Her anxiety heightened when she checked her phone during a break. No new messages, no missed calls. The silence felt deafening. Later that evening, Sophia sat in her car in the airport parking lot, the glow of the dashboard illuminating her troubled expression. Her shift was over, but she couldn't bring herself to drive home. The unanswered message lingered in her mind like an itch she couldn't scratch. Finally, she typed a reply. Who is this? Her thumb hovered over the send button for several agonizing seconds before she pressed it. The message sent, a small green checkmark confirming its delivery. She stared at her phone, willing it to buzz with a response. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. Defeated, Sophia started the car and began the drive home. She told herself she had done all she could, for now. But her resolve to uncover the truth only deepened. That night, Sophia's dreams were haunted by fragmented memories. She saw Matthew standing on a dock, waving goodbye before stepping onto the small boat that would ultimately seal his fate. She remembered the call from the authorities, the search party, and the day they declared him lost at sea. Then the dreams shifted, and she was back on the plane, staring into the eyes of the man who had torn her world apart with a single glance. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her confusion pressing down on her chest. It wasn't just about her anymore. If Matthew was alive, Lucas had a right to know. But how could she protect her son from the chaos this revelation would bring? The next day brought more questions than answers. As Sophia walked through the terminal, her phone buzzed again. Her heart leapt, But when she looked, it was only a work notification. She sighed, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Just as she reached her assigned gate, she spotted a familiar figure sitting near the windows. Liam, the kind passenger from the previous flight, was reading a book, a faint smile on his face. The sight of him brought a small sense of relief. Liam looked up as she approached, his expression softening. "Sophia," he greeted warmly. "Didn't expect to see you here again so soon." She smiled weakly. "I work here, remember?" He chuckled. "Right. Still, nice to see a familiar face." Something about Liam's calm demeanor was grounding. On impulse, she sat down beside him. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Liam's brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "You remember that man in first class? The one sitting with the woman?" Liam nodded. "Yeah, what about him?" Sophia swallowed hard. He looked exactly like my husband. My husband who died 5 years ago." For a moment, Liam didn't speak, his eyes searching hers for any sign of a joke. When he realized she was serious, his expression softened with concern. That's a lot to take in," he said carefully. "Are you sure it was him?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted, "but he left me a message after the flight. Or at least, someone did. And I don't know what to do." Liam placed a comforting hand on hers. "You're not alone in this. If you need help figuring this out, I'll do whatever I can." For the first time since the flight, Sophia felt a glimmer of hope. Though the mystery of Matthew, or the man who looked like him, remained unsolved, she realized she didn't have to face it alone. Sophia's heart felt lighter as she walked away from her conversation with Liam. His kindness and willingness to help had given her a small sense of stability amid the storm raging in her mind. Yet, as she drove home that evening, the message on her phone continued to haunt her. "I saw you looking at me on the plane." Whoever had sent it knew exactly what they were doing, and Sophia couldn't escape the feeling that the words carried more than just an observation. It was a call to action, a provocation. That night, after tucking Lucas into bed and ensuring he was fast asleep, Sophia poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the small kitchen table. Her phone lay in front of her, the message still open. She reread it, hoping to decipher a hidden meaning that might ease her torment. With a deep breath, she typed another response. "If you know me, say who you are." She stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity after sending the message, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was eerily quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an hour. Finally, her phone buzzed. The reply was instant and brief. "You already know who I am." Sophia's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she clutched the phone, her mind racing. It couldn't be a coincidence anymore. This wasn't just someone playing a cruel prank. It had to be him. But why the cryptic games? Why not simply reveal himself? Her fingers flew across the screen. "If you're Matthew, why didn't you say anything to me on the plane? Why did you let me think you were dead for 5 years?" This time, the response came even faster. "I couldn't. Not there. Not then. I'll explain everything, but not like this." Sophia's frustration boiled over. She felt like a puppet being manipulated by a masterful hand, and she hated it. She needed clarity, not vague promises. "When? Where?" she typed, her tone as firm as she could make it. The reply took longer this time, and with each passing second, her anxiety grew. Finally, the phone buzzed again. "Tomorrow night. The park near your apartment. 10 p.m. Sophia stared at the message, her emotions oscillating between fear and anger. Was it really him? If it was, why the secrecy? And if it wasn't, what kind of danger was she walking into? The next day dragged on painfully. Every moment was colored by the anticipation of the meeting. At work, her focus wavered so much that Maria pulled her aside during a break. "You're somewhere else entirely," Maria said gently, her brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on, Sophia?" Sophia hesitated, tempted to confide in her friend. But how could she explain something so surreal without sounding unhinged? "I'm just dealing with some personal stuff," she said finally, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I'll be fine." Maria nodded, but didn't look entirely convinced. If you need anything, you know where to find me. Sophia offered her a weak smile, grateful for the support, but unable to let anyone else into the turmoil she was facing. By the time evening arrived, Sophia's nerves were frayed. She had told Lucas she needed to run an errand and arranged for a neighbor to check in on him. Dressed in dark jeans and a hoodie, she walked to the park with her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The park was nearly deserted when she arrived. The faint glow of streetlights illuminated the winding paths, casting long shadows that danced with the gentle sway of the trees. Sophia's footsteps echoed in the stillness as she approached the central fountain, her heart pounding harder with each step. For a moment, she thought she was alone. But then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a figure step out of the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him, the man from the plane, the man who looked exactly like Matthew. He stood a few feet away, his face partially obscured by the dim light, but there was no mistaking him. He wore a dark coat, his hands shoved into the pockets as he watched her cautiously. "Sophia," he said, his voice low and familiar. Her legs felt weak, and she had to steady herself against the fountain. "Is it really you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The man took a step closer, his features becoming clearer. It was as if time had rewound 5 years. He looked the same as the day he had left. "It's me," he said, his tone filled with regret. Sophia's emotions surged, relief, anger, confusion, all colliding at once. "How? Why? You let me think you were dead. Do you have any idea what you put me through? What you put Lucas through?" Matthew, or the man who claimed to be him, lowered his gaze. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I had no choice." "No choice?" Sophia repeated, her voice rising. "You had no choice but to fake your death and disappear? To abandon your family?" He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and urgency. "It wasn't safe. For you. For Lucas. I didn't want to leave, but I had to." Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You had to? That's all you have to say?" Matthew took another step closer, his expression earnest. "I promise, I'll explain everything. But not here, not now. I just need you to trust me for a little while longer." Trust. The word felt like a slap in the face. How could he ask for trust after what he'd done? "Why now?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why come back after all this time?" Matthew hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure they were truly alone. "Because I couldn't stay away anymore. I've been watching from the shadows, making sure you were safe. But something's changed. I need to tell you the truth, Sophia, but it's complicated." Sophia stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Part of her wanted to believe him, to throw her arms around him and let herself hope. But another part screamed that this was all too much, too dangerous. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly. Matthew's gaze softened. "Please, just give me a chance. I'll explain everything soon. Just not tonight." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows before she could respond. Sophia stood there, her heart aching with the weight of unanswered questions. She had come seeking clarity, but all she had now were more mysteries. Sophia stood frozen by the fountain long after Matthew disappeared into the shadows. The chill of the night air seeped through her hoodie, but it was nothing compared to the icy dread settling in her chest. The man she had mourned for 5 years, her husband, the father of her son, was alive. Yet instead of relief, all she felt was a tangled knot of confusion, anger, and fear. When she finally returned home, the apartment was quiet. Lucas was fast asleep, his peaceful face illuminated by the glow of his nightlight. Sophia sat on the edge of his bed for a long moment, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I don't know what's happening, baby," she whispered, "but I promise I'll protect you, no matter what." The next morning, Sophia was a wreck. She barely slept, and every attempt to piece together the events of the past 24 hours left her with more questions than answers. At work, she moved through her tasks on autopilot, her mind elsewhere. "Earth to Sophia," Maria's voice broke through her fog. "You've been staring at that coffee pot for 5 minutes. You okay?" Sophia blinked, realizing she had completely forgotten what she was doing. "Yes, sorry. Just tired." Maria gave her a skeptical look, but didn't press further. The day passed in a blur, and by the time her shift ended, Sophia felt like she was holding herself together with fraying threads. As she walked through the terminal to head home, she spotted Liam sitting in a cafe near the departure gates. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, waving her over. "Twice in 1 week," Liam said warmly as she approached. "Starting to think fate's trying to make us friends." Sophia managed a small smile. There was something calming about Liam's presence, an unspoken kindness that made her feel safe. "Can I sit?" she asked. "Of course," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "You look like you could use a coffee, or maybe something stronger." Sophia laughed lightly, the sound surprising even herself. "Coffee's fine for now." Liam flagged down a server, and soon, a steaming cup was placed in front of her. Sophia stared at it for a moment, then looked up at him. "Can I ask you something?" she said hesitantly. "Shoot," Liam replied, his expression open and curious. Sophia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But the weight of her secret was becoming unbearable, and Liam felt like someone she could trust. "Do you remember the man in first class on the flight the other day?" she began. Liam nodded. "The one sitting with that woman?" "Yeah, him." Sophia took a deep breath. "He looked exactly like my husband." Liam's brows knitted together in surprise. "Your husband?" "My husband who died 5 years ago," she clarified, her voice trembling. For a moment, Liam just stared at her, processing her words. Then he leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle. "That's a lot to take in. Are you sure it was him?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "At first, I thought I was imagining things. But then," she hesitated, debating whether to mention the message. "Then what?" Liam prompted softly. "Then I got a message," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "From an unknown number. It said, 'I saw you looking at me on the plane.'" Liam's eyes widened. "And you think it was him?" "I don't just think it," Sophia said, her hands trembling around the coffee cup. "I met him last night. He told me it was him, that he's been alive this whole time." Liam leaned back, letting out a low whistle. "That's unbelievable. Did he explain why?" Sophia shook her head. "Not really. He said it wasn't safe for him to stay, that he left to protect us. But he wouldn't tell me the whole story." Liam frowned, his expression thoughtful. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe," Sophia admitted. "But if it's true, I need to know why. I need to know the truth, for me, for my son." Liam was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, if you want to figure this out, I'll help you." Sophia blinked, startled by his offer. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Liam said with a small smile. "But you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And no one should have to face something like this alone." Sophia felt a lump rise in her throat. She had spent so long keeping her pain bottled up, trying to be strong for Lucas. To have someone offer their support so freely was both overwhelming and deeply comforting. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Over the next few days, Liam proved to be a steady and supportive presence. He listened without judgment as Sophia recounted her life with Matthew, the happy years before his disappearance and the crushing grief that followed. "I just don't understand why he didn't come back sooner," Sophia said one evening as they sat in a quiet corner of the airport cafe. "If he's been alive this whole time, why wait 5 years?" "Maybe he's telling the truth about it not being safe," Liam suggested. "But if that's the case, you deserve to know what kind of danger he was in, and whether it's still a threat now." Sophia nodded. "That's what scares me the most. If he was involved in something dangerous, what if it comes back to haunt us?" Liam reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "Whatever happens, you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." For the first time in years, Sophia felt like she could breathe. With Liam's help, she began to gather her courage for the next step, finding out the truth about Matthew, no matter how painful or dangerous it might be. The days that followed were a storm of emotions for Sophia. The thought of confronting Matthew again filled her with both dread and anticipation. Liam's unwavering support gave her strength, but the questions still swirled relentlessly in her mind. Why did he fake his death? What kind of danger had he been in? Why was he back now? On a rainy evening, Sophia was at home reviewing flight schedules when a knock at the door startled her. Lucas had just gone to bed, and the sound echoed unnervingly in the quiet apartment. She hesitated, her heart thudding in her chest. Another knock followed, firmer this time. She approached cautiously, peeking through the peephole. Her breath caught when she saw him. Matthew. Sophia opened the door slowly, her body tense. Matthew stood there, drenched from the rain, his face a mask of exhaustion and desperation. Sophia, he said, his voice rough. Can I come in? She hesitated, her mind screaming at her to slam the door. But her heart, still tied to the man she had loved, wouldn't let her. With a reluctant nod, she stepped aside. Matthew entered, his presence filling the small apartment. He glanced around, his gaze softening when he saw a framed photo of Lucas on the shelf. Lucas, he murmured. Don't, Sophia snapped, crossing her arms defensively. You don't get to say his name like that. You left us. You let me think you were dead. You have no right to walk back into our lives like this. Matthew turned to face her, guilt etched into his features. I know, and I'm sorry, but I need you to understand, I didn't have a choice. Sophia scoffed. That's what you said before. You didn't have a choice. So explain it to me, Matthew. Make me understand why you thought disappearing was better than staying with your family. He ran a hand through his damp hair, his shoulders slumping. It's a long story, he said. I'm not going anywhere, Sophia replied coldly. Matthew took a deep breath. 5 years ago, I got involved with people I shouldn't have. It started with a business deal, something that seemed legitimate at first. But as I got deeper into it, I realized I was working with criminals. Dangerous ones. Sophia's eyes narrowed. What kind of criminals? Matthew hesitated, his gaze darting to the floor. Smugglers. They were moving illegal goods, laundering money, and worse. When I tried to back out, they threatened me. And they threatened you and Lucas. Sophia's heart clenched, but she didn't let him see it. So your solution was to vanish? To make me think you were dead? It was the only way to keep you safe, Matthew said, his voice cracking. If they thought I was gone, they wouldn't come after you. I staged everything, the accident, the disappearance, so they believe I was out of the picture. Sophia's anger flared. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To Lucas? He cried himself to sleep for months, asking why Daddy wasn't coming home. And me? I had to pick up the pieces of our life alone. I had to rebuild everything, thinking you were gone forever. Tears filled Matthew's eyes. I know, Sophia, and I hate myself for it. But I couldn't risk your lives. I thought I was doing the right thing. Sophia shook her head, her voice trembling. The right thing? The right thing would have been to stay and fight for your family. I did fight, Matthew insisted. I've spent the past 5 years trying to bring them down. I've been working with authorities, feeding them information from the inside. It's taken everything I had, but I finally found a way out. Sophia stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind. She wanted to believe him, but the pain and betrayal were too raw. And now what? You just show up out of the blue and expect me to welcome you back? To forget everything you put me through? Matthew's shoulders sagged. I don't expect anything. I had to see you. To explain. To tell you that it's finally over. Is it? Sophia demanded. Is it really over, or are you just dragging us into more danger? Matthew hesitated, and that moment of silence told her everything she needed to know. Sophia stepped back, her arms wrapping around herself. I can't do this, Matthew. I can't let you back into our lives if it means putting Lucas at risk. I would never let anything happen to him, Matthew said fervently. Or to you. That's what you said last time, she shot back. And look where it got us. The room fell silent, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Matthew spoke, his voice soft. I'll go, but I want you to know I love you, Sophia. I never stopped. And if there's any chance at all, I want to make things right. Sophia didn't respond, her emotions too tangled to untangle in that moment. Matthew nodded, understanding. He turned and walked to the door, pausing as if he wanted to say more. But instead, he opened it and stepped out into the rain. As the door closed behind him, Sophia leaned against it, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know what hurt more, the fact that he had returned or the fear that he might still leave again. She thought of Lucas, sleeping peacefully in the next room. Whatever happened next, she had to protect him, no matter what. That night, Sophia called Liam. "I saw him," she said as soon as he answered. "Matthew?" Liam asked, his voice sharp with concern. "Yeah, he came to my apartment. He told me everything. Are you okay?" Liam asked gently. "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "He says it's over, that the danger's gone, but I don't know if I can believe him." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sophia, if you want my advice, don't take his word for it. Let me help you look into this. If there's even a small chance he's still involved in something dangerous, you need to know." Sophia nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Okay, let's figure this out." As she hung up the phone, a new resolve settled over her. She didn't know if she could trust Matthew, but she would get to the bottom of this. For Lucas, for herself, for the life they had rebuilt without him. The next morning, Sophia woke up feeling the weight of her decision. Allowing Liam to help her investigate Matthew felt like the only way forward, but it also deepened the emotional turmoil she was already facing. Her thoughts were interrupted when Lucas bounded into the room, still in his pajamas. "Mom, can we go to the park today?" Sophia forced a smile. "Maybe later, sweetie. Mommy has some things to take care of first." Lucas pouted but nodded, accepting her answer. She pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "I love you so much, Lucas," she whispered. "Love you too, Mom," he mumbled, his voice muffled against her shoulder. After breakfast, Sophia dropped Lucas off at her neighbor's, Mrs. Alvarez, who had always been kind enough to babysit in emergencies. With a hurried thank you, Sophia headed to the cafe where she had agreed to meet Liam. Liam was already waiting for her, his laptop open and a cup of coffee in hand. He greeted her with a warm smile that momentarily eased the tension in her chest. "Morning," he said, sliding a second coffee across the table toward her. "Thought you might need this." "Thanks," Sophia said, taking a grateful sip before sitting down. "All right," Liam began, his tone serious. "I spent some time last night looking into the name Matthew gave you. Those smugglers he mentioned. If he's telling the truth, then the people he got involved with are part of a pretty big operation." Sophia leaned forward, her heart pounding. "How dangerous are they?" "Very," Liam replied. "They've been under investigation for years. Smuggling, money laundering, even human trafficking. But they're slippery. Every time the authorities get close, they manage to disappear." Sophia's stomach churned. "And Matthew was involved with them?" "It sounds like it," Liam said. "But what I don't understand is why he thinks it's over. These kinds of people don't just let someone walk away. If Matthew staged his death to get out, they'd have even more reason to come after him and anyone connected to him." Sophia's hands trembled as she set her coffee cup down. "So you're saying Lucas and I could still be in danger?" Liam reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "That's why we're going to figure this out. If Matthew's hiding something, or if there's any way to protect you and Lucas, we'll find it." The rest of the day was a blur of research. Liam showed Sophia how to access public records and dig through online databases. Together, they searched for any mention of Matthew's name or connections to the criminal organization. As they worked, Sophia found herself opening up to Liam more and more. He had a calm, steady presence that made her feel safe, and she realized how much she had missed having someone to lean on. At one point, she glanced at him and asked, "Why are you helping me with all this? You barely know me." Liam looked up from his laptop, his expression thoughtful. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." Sophia tilted her head, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then sighed. "A few years ago, my business was targeted by fraudsters. They drained my accounts, ruined my reputation. I lost everything I'd worked for, and it nearly destroyed me." "I'm so sorry," Sophia said softly. Liam shrugged, a small, bittersweet smile on his lips. "I managed to rebuild, but it taught me a lot about trust. and about how hard it is to fight back when you're up against people who don't play fair. Sophia nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. That evening, as Sophia walked home, her mind was buzzing with everything they had uncovered. There were no concrete answers yet, but the picture was becoming clearer. Matthew's past was darker and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. When she entered the apartment, Lucas was already asleep, and the quiet gave her time to think. She pulled out her phone, hesitating before typing a message to Matthew. "We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow. Same place as last time." She stared at the screen for a moment before hitting send. The next day, Sophia found herself back at the park by the fountain. The air was crisp, and the sound of children playing in the distance was oddly comforting. Matthew arrived a few minutes later, looking more tired and haggard than before. He approached cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. "You wanted to see me?" he asked. Sophia nodded, crossing her arms. "I've been doing some digging, Matthew, about the people you got involved with, about the danger you supposedly left to protect us from." Matthew's expression darkened. "Sophia, I told you." "You told me a lot of things," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "But what you didn't tell me is why you think it's safe now. Why you're suddenly back, acting like everything's fine." Matthew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I finished what I started. I gave the authorities everything they needed to take the organization down. They're not a threat anymore." "How can you be sure?" Sophia demanded. "These are dangerous people, Matthew. They don't just go away." "I can't tell you everything," Matthew said, his voice pleading, "but you have to trust me on this. It's over." Sophia shook her head, her frustration boiling over. "How am I supposed to trust you? After everything you've done? After everything you've put me through?" Matthew's face crumpled, and for a moment, he looked utterly defeated. "I don't know. I wanted to come back. To fix things. To be there for you and Lucas." Sophia's heart ached at his words, but she couldn't let herself be swayed. "You don't get to just walk back into our lives and expect everything to go back to the way it was. I've spent 5 years trying to move on. Lucas barely remembers you." "I know," Matthew said, his voice breaking, "and I hate myself for that. But I still love you, Sophia. I never stopped." She looked away, tears pricking at her eyes. "Love isn't enough, Matthew. Not after everything." They stood in silence, the distance between them feeling insurmountable. Finally, Sophia spoke again, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "If you really love us, you'll prove it. You'll give me the whole truth. No more half answers, no more secrets. If you can't do that, then there's no place for you in our lives." Matthew stared at her, pain and regret etched into his face. "All right," he said finally. "You deserve the truth. All of it." Sophia nodded, her resolve firm. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on, for herself and for Lucas. Sophia sat across from Matthew in a dimly lit cafe, her hands tightly gripping her cup of tea. The air between them was thick with tension, every word Matthew spoke weighing heavily on her. "The organization I got involved with wasn't just smuggling goods. They were trafficking people," Matthew admitted, his voice trembling. "At first, I didn't know. I thought I was helping move harmless shipments, but by the time I figured out what was really happening, I was in too deep." Sophia's stomach churned, disgust and anger mixing with a reluctant sympathy. She hated the choices he'd made, but she could see the torment in his eyes. "Why didn't you go to the police sooner?" she asked, her voice sharp. "They owned the police, or at least enough of them to make it dangerous," Matthew explained. "When I tried to back out, they threatened you and Lucas. That's when I knew I had to disappear. Faking my death was the only way to protect you both." Sophia shook her head, her heart aching with betrayal. "You could have told me, Matthew. I deserve to know the truth. Instead, you left me to grieve, to pick up the pieces alone." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I couldn't risk it. If they thought I was still in contact with you, they would have used you to get to me." Sophia took a deep breath, trying to process his words. "So why now? Why come back if you still think they're a threat?" "They're not," Matthew said firmly. "I worked with an undercover unit to bring them down. It took years of gathering evidence, but they finally made their move last month. The key players are either dead or in custody. It's over. Sophia wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. And what about you? Are you safe now? Matthew hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. I don't know. The organization might be dismantled, but there are always loose ends. People who slip through the cracks. His admission sent a chill down Sophia's spine. So you're telling me Lucas and I could still be in danger? I would never let anything happen to you or Lucas, Matthew said, his voice filled with determination. That's why I came back, to make sure you're safe. Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention. She looked up to see Liam entering the cafe, his expression tense. Sophia, he said, his eyes flickering to Matthew. We need to talk. Now. Outside the cafe, Sophia pulled Liam aside, her heart racing. What's going on? She asked. I've been in contact with someone from the task force that was investigating the organization Matthew mentioned, Liam said, his voice low. They've been trying to track him down. They believe he still has critical information about other members who escaped. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. So what happens if they find him? They'll arrest him, Liam said bluntly. He's still complicit in the crimes, no matter what he's done to help bring the organization down. Sophia's mind reeled. Matthew had made terrible choices, but he had also tried to protect her and Lucas. Could she really stand by and let him be arrested? I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice shaking. Liam placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to decide right now, but if he really wants to make things right, turning himself in might be the only way to truly protect you and Lucas. Later that night, Sophia confronted Matthew in her apartment. Lucas was asleep in his room, and the quiet only heightened the tension between them. You need to tell me everything, she said, her voice firm. No more lies, no more half-truths. If I'm going to trust you, I need to know the whole story. Matthew hesitated, then nodded. Over the next hour, he laid everything bare. The deals he had made, the people he had worked with, and the lengths he had gone to in order to escape. When he was finished, Sophia sat in silence, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, sorrow, and confusion. There's one more thing, Matthew said, his tone hesitant. I think someone might be watching me. I've seen the same car parked near the places I've been staying. If they know I'm alive, they might come after you and Lucas. Sophia's blood ran cold. We need to go to the police, she said. No, Matthew said quickly. If they arrest me, I won't be able to protect you. You can't protect us if you're dead either, Sophia snapped. This has to stop, Matthew. You can't keep running. He stared at her, his expression pained. I don't know if I can do it, Sophia. Facing prison, leaving you and Lucas again. It might destroy me. Sophia softened, stepping closer to him. If you really love us, you'll do whatever it takes to keep us safe, even if that means turning yourself in. The next morning, Matthew made the hardest decision of his life. With Sophia by his side, he walked into the local police station and surrendered. Hours later, as she watched him being led away in handcuffs, Sophia felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had taken control of her life. Liam was waiting for her outside the station. You did the right thing, he said gently. Sophia nodded, though her heart ached. I hope so. As they walked to the car, Liam added, This isn't the end, Sophia. You've been through so much, but you're stronger than you think, and you don't have to face this alone. For the first time in years, Sophia allowed herself to believe that might be true. The news of Matthew's arrest spread quickly, splashing across headlines and dominating local media. Former businessman tied to international smuggling ring arrested. The articles read, accompanied by photos of Matthew being led away in handcuffs. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, the TV muted as the news anchor recapped the story yet again. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. Some expressed shock, others offered support, but many sought gossip, prying into details she wasn't ready to share. Lucas, thankfully, was too young to understand the gravity of the situation. For him, the days passed with cartoons and trips to the park, shielded from the storm brewing around his mother. Sophia's heart ached as she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for her son. Every time she saw the news or heard Matthew's name mentioned in whispers, she was reminded of the life she had lost, and the life she now had to rebuild. One afternoon, as she scrolled through yet another article about Matthew, her phone buzzed with a call from Liam. "Hey," she answered, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Hey," Liam said gently. "How are you holding up?" Sophia sighed. "It feels like the whole world is watching me, waiting for me to say something. I don't even know what to think anymore. Why don't we get out of here for a bit?" Liam suggested. "I know a quiet spot by the lake. It'll give you a chance to clear your head." Sophia hesitated, but eventually agreed. A break from the chaos sounded exactly like what she needed. The lake was serene, the water glistening under the late afternoon sun. Liam spread a blanket on the grass, offering Sophia a thermos of coffee. "This is nice," she admitted, taking a sip. "I thought you could use some peace," Liam said. "You've been through so much, Sophia. You deserve a moment to breathe." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the water. "I keep thinking about Lucas. How do I explain this to him when he's older? That his father was a criminal? That he lied to us, left us?" Liam leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You tell him the truth, that his father made mistakes, but he also tried to protect you both in his own way. And you show him that you're strong enough to move forward, no matter what." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't feel strong, Liam. I feel like everything is falling apart." "You're stronger than you think," he said softly, "and you don't have to face this alone." The calm of the lake was short-lived. When Sophia returned home, she found reporters waiting outside her building, cameras flashing as they shouted questions. "Ms. Taylor, do you believe Matthew deserves a second chance? Was he coerced into his involvement, or was he complicit? How has this affected your family?" Sophia froze, clutching Lucas's hand tightly as she shielded him from the chaos. "No comment," she said firmly, pushing past the crowd and into the building. Her heart pounded as she locked the door behind her. Lucas looked up at her, confused. "Why were those people yelling, Mommy?" "They just want to ask questions about Daddy," she said gently, kneeling to his level. "But you don't need to worry about that, okay?" Lucas nodded, though Sophia could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and media scrutiny. Sophia was called to testify as part of the investigation, forced to recount the details of her relationship with Matthew and the years they had spent apart. Sitting in the sterile courtroom, she felt exposed, every word scrutinized by strangers. Matthew sat across the room, his gaze fixed on her. There was regret in his eyes, but also a quiet determination. When the proceedings ended for the day, Sophia found herself alone in the hallway, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to steady herself. "Sophia." She looked up to see Matthew standing a few feet away, flanked by guards. His voice was low, his expression pained. "I'm sorry for everything." She didn't respond, her chest tightening. The guards ushered him away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Back at home, Sophia tried to focus on rebuilding her life. She leaned on Liam more than ever, grateful for his steady presence. He helped her navigate the fallout, from dealing with reporters to finding a lawyer who could handle the custody implications for Lucas. One evening, as they worked on paperwork together, Liam paused, his brow furrowed. "Sophia," he began, "there's something you should know." She looked up, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" "I've been digging into some of the loose ends from Matthew's case," Liam said. "There's evidence that not all of the organization's members were caught. A few key players are still out there." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. "So we're still not safe?" "I don't want to scare you," Liam said, "but it's something we need to be aware of. If anyone connected to them finds out you're involved in the case." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. That night, as Sophia lay awake in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows in her room felt heavier, the creaks of the old building louder than usual. She got up, checking the locks on the doors and windows before returning to bed. As she curled up under the blankets, she whispered a silent prayer for strength, for herself, for Lucas, and for whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that she could rebuild, that she could protect her son, and that she could find a future free from the shadows of Matthew's past. The day Sophia had dreaded arrived. She was scheduled to visit Matthew in prison. It had been weeks since his arrest, and the weight of his betrayal still loomed over her. Though she had tried to move on, tried to make peace with everything that had happened, the reality of what he had done, and what he had kept from her, still gnawed at her. As she stood in front of the cold, sterile prison gates, a part of her wanted to turn away. She had already made the difficult decision to let him go, to let the past remain where it belonged. But something deep inside her told her she needed to face him, to confront the man who had once been her husband, the father of her child, and the source of her deepest pain. She walked through the metal detectors, her heart pounding with each step. The guard handed her a visitor's pass and led her down a long hallway. The sound of doors clanging shut, the echo of guards' boots on the concrete floor. It all felt surreal. She hadn't imagined herself here, facing Matthew across a cold, metal table, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and the harsh light of the fluorescent lamps above. The guard unlocked the door to the visiting room, and Sophia stepped inside. There, at a table, sat Matthew, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to the table. His eyes locked onto hers the moment she entered, and the look in them made her stomach drop. "Sophia," he said softly, his voice hoarse as though he had been waiting for this moment, too. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them felt impossibly vast, the silence deafening. Finally, Sophia found her voice. "I don't know why I'm here," she admitted, her words coming out in a whisper. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I can't keep living in the past, Matthew. I need answers." Matthew nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. "I understand. I never expected forgiveness, Sophia. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I owe you the truth." She sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. "Then tell me everything. From the beginning." Matthew took a deep breath, his face lined with regret as he began. "I never wanted to get involved in any of this. At first, I thought I was doing something good, helping people in need. But as time went on, I realized what I was really a part of. I made mistakes, huge mistakes. And when I finally figured out that I couldn't back out, I had no choice but to disappear. I thought you and Lucas would be better off if I was gone." Sophia closed her eyes, fighting the sting of tears. "So you thought lying to me, leaving me without a word, was the answer? You thought I would be better off believing you were dead?" "I was trying to protect you," Matthew said desperately, "but I see now how selfish that was. I didn't think about how it would hurt you. All I could think about was keeping you safe." Sophia's voice cracked as she spoke. "And what about the years I spent without you? What about the life I had to build on my own? Did you ever think about how I would have to pick up the pieces without you? I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I put you through. But you have to know, I didn't want this for us. I never wanted to destroy our family." Sophia felt the weight of his words, but she couldn't let go of the anger that still burned inside her. "You don't get to choose for me, Matthew. You don't get to decide what's best for me, or for Lucas. You took that from us. You took away everything we built together." Matthew's eyes softened, a pained expression crossing his face. I know, and that's the hardest part. I was wrong to leave you, wrong to think I could protect you by running away." For a long moment, the two of them sat in silence, the enormity of their shared history hanging heavy in the air. Sophia swallowed hard, struggling to maintain control of her emotions. "I don't know what to do with all this, Matthew. I want to hate you. I want to be angry at you for everything you did. But I'm also so confused. Because a part of me still loves you. A part of me still remembers the man I married, the man who promised to love me no matter what." Matthew's face crumpled, and he dropped his head into his hands. "I never deserved you, Sophia. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know, from the bottom of my heart, that I never wanted to hurt you. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the pain I caused." Sophia's throat tightened, the tears threatening to spill over. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Matthew. I don't even know if I want to. But I need to know that you're truly sorry. I need to know that you understand the damage you've done." Matthew looked up, his eyes filled with raw emotion. "I understand, and I will never stop being sorry. I will never stop trying to make things right." The conversation stretched on for hours, each word, each revelation, adding to the weight Sophia carried in her chest. By the time the guard came to escort her out, she felt drained, empty, yet strangely lighter. As she stepped back into the world outside the prison walls, the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the city. For the first time in weeks, Sophia felt a sense of finality. She had faced Matthew, had heard his side, and while she didn't have all the answers, she had taken the first step toward healing. But as she walked to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was far from over. The road to forgiveness, whether for Matthew or for herself, was still long and uncertain. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt the flicker of hope. A hope that, somehow, she would find her way. That, despite everything, she would rebuild her life and find peace, not just for Lucas, but for herself. She started the car and drove away, leaving the prison behind her. What lay ahead was unknown, but she was ready to face it. The weeks following her visit to Matthew were a blur, the weight of the past lingering over Sophia as she tried to move forward. The media had settled down, but the aftermath of Matthew's arrest still cast a long shadow. Though she had found a fragile peace in confronting him, the road to true closure was much more difficult than she had imagined. The biggest challenge was the uncertainty of her own feelings, of the future, and of how Lucas would process everything when he was old enough to understand. But there was something different in the air now. Something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter, though it was unclear where it would lead. Sophia spent her days trying to rebuild the fragments of her life, one step at a time. She had moved into a new apartment, one that felt like a fresh start, away from the reminders of the past. It wasn't perfect, there were still sleepless nights and moments of doubt, but it was hers. A place where she could start to heal, without the constant reminders of who Matthew had become. Liam continued to be a steady presence in her life. He had been there for her throughout the entire ordeal, and as time passed, their bond grew deeper. Though they both knew that the situation was complicated, they also understood that there was a quiet understanding between them. Liam had supported her without judgment, and now, he was the one person she could lean on. One chilly autumn evening, as she sat with Liam at a small cafe near her apartment, Sophia found herself reflecting on the journey she had been on. The pain, the betrayal, and the eventual realization that life had to go on. Liam stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "How are you holding up, really?" Sophia smiled faintly, the warmth of the cafe comforting. "It's been hard," she admitted. "There are days when I feel like I'm finally breathing, and then there are days when it feels like I'm drowning in everything that happened. But I'm learning to take it day by day. I'm learning to let go of what I can't control." Liam nodded, his eyes softening. "You're stronger than you realize, Sophia, and you're not alone. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Sophia looked at him, feeling a warmth in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness, of a life where she didn't have to be burdened by the past. It was on a quiet morning, nearly a month after her visit to Matthew in prison, that Sophia received a phone call that would change everything. "Miss Taylor?" the voice on the other end asked. "This is Detective Harper. I need to speak with you about Matthew's case." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "What about it?" "I can't go into detail over the phone, but it's important. Can you meet me at the station today?" The suddenness of the call unsettled her, but she agreed to meet him, her curiosity piqued. The police station was sterile and impersonal, much like the prison where she had seen Matthew. Detective Harper, a middle-aged man with graying hair and sharp eyes, led her into a small office, where he handed her a file. "I know this must be difficult for you, Miss Taylor," he began, "but there's been a new development in your husband's case." Sophia's pulse quickened. What kind of development? The detective hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "There are indications that Matthew may not have been entirely forthcoming about the extent of his involvement. We've uncovered new evidence that suggests there were others in his circle, people who were pulling the strings behind the scenes." We believe Matthew may have been a part of something much larger than we initially thought. Sophia stared at him, her mind racing. So you're saying he wasn't just a criminal? He was part of a bigger operation? Harper nodded grimly. It seems that way. We're still investigating, but there are serious implications. And given your proximity to the case, we need to ask for your cooperation in identifying anyone who might be involved. The weight of his words hit Sophia like a tidal wave. She had spent so long grappling with Matthew's actions, his betrayal, that the thought of him being a part of something even more dangerous was almost impossible to comprehend. I don't know if I can help, she said softly, her voice trembling. Matthew's already in prison. What else is there to uncover? Harper leaned forward. We believe there are still people out there who could pose a threat to you, to your family. If you remember anything at all, that could help us, it could make all the difference. Sophia swallowed hard. She had spent so much time trying to put the past behind her, trying to protect Lucas from the darkness that had surrounded their family. But now, the past was clawing its way back into her life, threatening to drag her down once again. The days that followed were filled with a sense of urgency and confusion. Sophia tried to keep her life as normal as possible for Lucas's sake, but the uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. She found herself recalling everything about Matthew's life before the arrest. The people he associated with, the secretive behavior, the long hours he'd spent away from home. She even thought back to their early years together, wondering if there had been signs she had missed, moments she had overlooked. One evening, as she was sorting through old documents and photos, she found something, a picture of Matthew and a man she didn't recognize. They were smiling together at a party, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. The man's face was partially obscured, but there was something about him that felt wrong. Sophia stared at the photo, her heart racing. Could this be one of the people Harper had been referring to? The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and more unsettling revelations. But through it all, Sophia found herself relying more and more on Liam. He was the one constant in her life, the one person who made her feel safe. One evening, as they sat together on the couch in her apartment, Liam turned to her, his expression serious. Sophia, I don't want you to go through this alone. You've been carrying this burden for so long. Let me help you. Sophia looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. I don't know what I'd do without you, Liam. You've been there for me every step of the way. Liam's gaze softened. I care about you, Sophia, more than you know. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. The weight of everything they had both endured, the pain and the betrayal, didn't feel so heavy. Sophia felt the warmth of his words settle deep inside her. She had come so far, further than she had ever thought possible. The pain of the past would always be a part of her, but it no longer had the power to control her. She leaned in, her heart finally open to the possibility of something new, something better. In that moment, Sophia realized that while the past could never be erased, it no longer defined her. She had a future to look forward to, a life to build. And with Liam by her side, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with strength, courage, and a heart that was finally ready to heal. Sophia closed her eyes, the future ahead of her full of promise, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the second chance she had been given. Months passed, and the world around Sophia began to feel lighter. The past, though never fully erased, had lost its grip on her. Matthew's case continued to unravel, but her involvement had lessened as the authorities took control. With each passing day, the burden of betrayal, lies, and fear became easier to bear. Sophia had rebuilt her life in ways she never thought possible. She was no longer the woman haunted by the shadows of the past, nor was she the young woman who had blindly trusted her husband. She had become someone stronger, more self-assured, someone who had learned to navigate the complicated terrain of grief, loss, and love. Liam remained by her side, his quiet support a constant source of comfort. They had grown closer, the bond between them evolving into something deep and meaningful. While the scars of her previous marriage would always be a part of her, Liam had shown her that love could be gentle, patient, and healing. One afternoon, as she sat on the balcony of her apartment, watching the sunset with Lucas nestled beside her, Sophia realized that the darkness had finally receded. The future that once seemed so uncertain now felt full of possibility. The love of a family, the support of a true friend, and the strength she had found within herself had given her the courage to move forward. She smiled to herself, a quiet peace settling over her. The journey wasn't easy, but it had led her here, to a place where she could breathe freely, where she could laugh without the weight of the past pressing down on her. And as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophia whispered softly, to herself and to the world around her, "It's time to begin again." The road ahead was still unknown, but for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt ready to embrace it, with hope, with grace, and with the belief that no matter what came next, she had the strength to face it. And so, her new beginning began. Thank you so much for following this story all the way to the end. We truly appreciate your support and attention throughout this journey. We hope the story has brought you deep emotions and enjoyable moments. If you like this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. We are always excited to bring you more engaging and inspiring content. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in our next videos.